that's the magic of story. It's been used since the beginning of time, and as I've argued, we're still in Western culture, right? We're still in the culture that the Greeks invented. Would you like a culture that strong?
Well, I'd have been against it, but they're back. Mark and Mike. It doesn't take a genius.
Ramsey!
Marshall, a good day to you. I'm glad to see us both still upright and taking nourishment.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole breathing thing. Good. Yeah, we have set the bar low.
Right. Well, we were talking about lowest common denominator. I just thought I'd point that out.
That's true. That's true. So, and then you started telling some stories.
Oh, I see what you did. I see what you did. I
Right.
have been thinking about stories, and actually, I have you to thank for it because you're always saying, what's your superpower? What's your superpower? And talking about people's skill sets and their natural inclinations of things that are maybe strengths for them. And it's come to my attention that people tend to tell me stories. I don't know quite what I do that makes people know that I'm listening, but I am. And it's a very common thing for clients to say to me on my first visit to their organization, um, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but, and then they'll go into the big story. And they are fascinating stories. I've loved every single one of them. I've heard some really good ones recently. And so it's got me thinking about how stories are so key to culture. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the advantages of identifying your stories so that you can harness them for part of your culture.
Oh yeah. Well, and I think yeah, can we harness them? And even before that, yeah, what are the current stories being told?
Yep.
And do those stories reflect the reality? And is there a change that needs to be made based upon what you're hearing in these
You
stories?
are predicting where I'm going with this, sir. You're spot on. Spot
Nice.
on.
I'm excited to learn.
Yeah. So I'll give you sort of my little elevator pitch here. I think the stories are the explanation for the way the culture believes and what they value. I think if you look at the culture, its values and beliefs, it comes from some really key memorable stories. And I'll give you an example. I worked with a gentleman who was the director of a big buy here, pay here operation. These are people that are buying a car that really what they're buying is credit, right? They can't get credit elsewhere, and so they're buying a car on the lot, making payments on the lot, and in many cases, it's getting repossessed, right? And so I knew a gentleman who was sort of a tough as nails Vietnam vet, and he ran this big buy here, pay here operation. And it had happened before that he had actually interviewed people and not sold them cars. He said, "You are not ready," and he had had people leave in tears because what he did was have a conversation with them about their budget, and he would talk to them about improving their budget and getting better. Now, a lot of buy here, pay here operations are fly by night, and they are not doing a service to their customers. This guy wanted people to get better. He wanted them to climb out of that hole that they were in with their budget and bad credit. Well, okay, cool. He was very successful. That's all nice. What made him that way? Well, come to find out, he had been abused and he had run away from home. And I'm talking like I can't remember how old he was, but I want to say he was around 11 or 12. He ran away from home and for a while lived on his own. He actually had a room above, I believe he told me it was a dry cleaner's laundromat of some kind. And he had a room above, and he remembers sitting down and putting pen to pencil or pen to paper and writing out like it's going to cost me this much for food, this much for getting my clothes clean, this much for, and he wrote out his own budget when he was a child. And so he'd been living this way for a very long time, had ended up becoming a car dealer, and then had retired and run a very successful buy here, pay here operation. Tons of twists and turns in his story. It literally should be a screenplay. It's got so much drama in it and adventure in it. But the origin of his whole way of doing things and his people's way of doing things was, I know what it's like. I have been through that experience, and here's how I came out of it, and you can too. And so his whole operation revolved around that. So I believe stories explain your values and your beliefs. Your
Mhm.
values and your beliefs drive everything, right? The language you use, the symbols you have in your workplace, the daily practices, all of that combined is your culture. And you and I know culture beats strategy every day. It's always stronger um, uh, than anything that actually might even be spoken out loud. It's stronger than that because the culture goes all the way back to your DNA, that those sets of stories that make up who you are. So that's my elevator pitch for where we're headed with this.
Oh, that's fantastic. No, you're so right. So the stories, when I think about the orientation after the orientation.
Yes.
So yeah, I get hired, HR has a little PowerPoint thing and they put their values and their vision and their mission up, and then they cover the bullet points. We believe in family and we believe in transparency and fairness and
Yep.
stuff like that. And you have to maybe you even have to sign a paper that you listen. I listened to this talk,
Yep.
and I saw those bullet points. Then you go out to your department, you go into your wherever you're going to be, on the job, and then you get the orientation after the orientation.
Yep.
And whether you bring it up or they bring it up, right? Somebody says, all right, so what's it like to really work here? They don't have slides and bullet points.
That's right.
All they have is, let me tell you about this one time.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, the
Yep.
old, this one time in band camp, you know.
There.
So, yeah, let me tell you about this time, right? They talk about family. But I remember Bob over here, Bob had his mom was sick, right? And things were slow. And he asked if he could take off early to take her to a doctor's appointment. And they said no.
Yeah.
That's what they believe about family around here.
Yep.
So, yeah, or you hear the opposite story. Here's a guy. His mom was sick. He had to take her to appointments on a fairly regular basis. Even though he clocked out, they still paid him his full pay. That's how much they
100%.
believe in family around here.
100%.
So,
100%.
yeah, nobody remembers the bullet points.
Yeah.
Everybody remembers the stories.
That's exactly it. Yeah, and we talk about Chris Argyris on here occasionally, famous organization development scholar, and he talks about the values espoused and the values in kind. We got values on the wall, on our mission statement, on our website, and we say that we're about them, but then in kind, in the moment, what happens? We don't practice what we preach, or we do, right? Or they're very much in sync, and there are some stories that paint that picture. So they're just super powerful, and this goes back a long way, by the way, Mike. I know it's going to shock you, but if you don't mind, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the ancient Greeks and Romans. I know this is just a stunning left turn for you, but if you don't mind, I'd like to
Well,
share something.
well, I'd love to hear a Laurel and Hardy story about
Oh
the ancient
my.
Greeks.
Wow. Wow. Now I want to talk about Laurel, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to
Yeah,
stay on task.
yeah.
Um,
That may be our first Blazing Saddle reference out of 200 plus episodes. Yeah. All right. So what was
uh,
going on in the old days in regards to stories?
well, they were everything. So, we've talked about the Greeks came up with this liberal arts system, these skills, these sets of skills that really were required for you to be formed into a citizen of your city state. They had in fact, we talked about this very recently, about excellence and dignity, right? And talking about how there was this paideia, this way of training you, way of educating you that turned you into a virtuous citizen for your city. Well, that didn't start with the liberal arts. And the Greeks, their system was adopted by the Romans. The Romans would have been in the same boat. Um, Basically, early on, you would have been doing probably some physical fitness stuff as a kid, and probably some artistic stuff, music maybe. And you would have been learning stories. So we're talking about, yeah, we're talking about, Aesop's fables, but we're also talking about epic poetry. We're talking about the Iliad and the Odyssey, learning about, um, Paris of Troy and Achilles and Odysseus and the gods who, intervened in their lives and what happened as they took these adventures. And the reason we're studying those stories and learning them by heart, and I mean, these are books, right? These are huge stories that they would have been reciting from memory in many cases. Well, after you get that, then you get trucked off to I think it was the grammaticus is the name of the position, but it's the grammar teacher, the guy that's going to teach you grammar and how to read and write. But you knew the stories beforehand. In fact, you could quote them. In fact, you were made to quote them. And those stories were what they were playing with once they got to the liberal arts. Once they got to their formal education that was forming them, it was all based on these stories swimming around in their head about, Achilles and his struggle with anger, and Odysseus and his ability to be clever. And, should these gods have done XYZ or shouldn't they have done XYZ? We could debate that. All these stories, they weren't these black and white little fables like Aesop had. Those are great too. But these were stories that were enough that we could sink our teeth into and really have a conversation about and say, you know what, this is making me a little bit enlightened, right? This is bringing me along. There's a quote that is this is a little wordy, but it's wonderful from a modern scholar, David Hicks, who wrote this treatise on classical education. He said, "Only by wrestling dialectically with the angel of the myth, which is its dogma, its ideal type, can the student be blessed with a larger truth and a stronger conscience." So obviously, that's talking about a school and a student who's, becoming a mature human being that is wise and virtuous. But that little beginning part, wrestling dialectically. I'm going to have conversations. I'm going to have arguments and debates about the kinds of stories that we're sharing here because there's something inside that story that has the real nugget that the quote calls it the ideal type. The thing that is just like this is really what we're about. This is our DNA. And we need to be able to have conversations about that, and that's going to allow me to have a larger truth and to have a stronger conscience. I'll be more on board with what we're about here. I'll be a patriot of this particular company because I get what we're about. That's the magic of story. It's been used since the beginning of time, and as I've argued, we're still in Western culture, right? We're still in the culture that the Greeks invented. Would you like a culture that strong? Well, if so, you've got to have stories at the basis of all your training and education for your people. The end.
No, I think you're exactly right. The idea that you call it wrestling, uh,
Yep.
that yeah, these stories are complex, they're intricate.
Yep.
In some cases, the antagonist, the protagonist may not make the same choices you would make,
That's right.
and it's the discussion of those complicated, nuanced things that allow people to begin their development of their critical thinking skills.
You nailed it. You nailed it. And think how much that drops it further down into our brain, into our soul, right? It's not just this conscious thing like, oh yes, Mr. Meyer, he invented grocery stores because it was going through the Depression, and he realized that people were struggling to find enough produce during the Depression, and so he invented Meyer, the grocery chain. I mean, okay, that's the origin story, but it's a little more than that, right? Like there are some things you could tell about how Meyer came out with his. Did you know he invented the superstore? He was the first one to have a superstore back in the 60s. I think it was called Thrifty Acres. What a name, Thrifty Acres. But there's a story there, right? And it paints a picture of how they did what they did. Henry Ford, right? He He's in one of the early advertisements, he says, opening the highways to all mankind, right? And that idea of, we're about democratically spreading out the ability for people to have a car. They're all going to be black. That's one reason, right? We're lowering the cost of all these Model Ts because we're going to make sure that it's affordable for everybody in this country to have one. We want everybody in this country to have one. We even made it to where our employees can have one. Those were the kinds of things that were the essence of what the Ford Motor Company was about, what Meyer is about. Um, I could go on and on about sort of this idea of it's complex enough that it explains us, but it's still worth talking about because what is that nut? What is the thing that really needs to come out of that? It's obviously not painting all of our cars black all the time. That's not the solution Henry Ford was looking for. It's more about we're opening the highways to all mankind. So that was what that DNA turned into as time went on with Ford Motor Company.
Oh yeah.
So
Well, it goes back to what you said, right? It's an explanation of your values and beliefs,
that's right.
right? I believe that everyone should be able to have a car. Here's how I'm going to do it, right? A
Yep.
mass assembly line, and plus paying your employees enough that they make enough to be able to
That's right.
purchase a car. So when you talk about this, all your decisions, all your behaviors derive from your visions and beliefs, or your values and beliefs.
Yeah.
So yeah, whether it was picking black, and it's a misnomer that it was inexpensive. The story I heard was that the color black dried the fastest of all
Even better.
of all the colors, right? Black dried the fastest, which allowed the production line to go even quicker.
Right.
And so if I can make a whole bunch of these things at a low cost, pay my people well, then they can afford to buy the thing that they're building.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Perfect.
that's my core belief is that everybody who wants one should be able to have one.
Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. So I think it's worth doing some mining for your stories. And frankly, if we're uh, having in our listening audience right now any of the founders of a particular firm, I think this is for you too. You need to go back and think about some of the stories yourself. You've been living it so long, you may have forgotten how stunning it is, some of the things that you've achieved and overcome and so on. So we would strongly suggest that you do this focus groups, interviews, sitting down and writing out the story as you remember what happened when you started with the firm and so on and so forth. There are all sorts of opportunities to do this, but I in particular I've thought of three. You may come up with some others, Mike, as we sort of go through this list and close out the episode, but I think there are at least three kinds of stories you can be looking for. And the first one's the obvious one, the origin story. Uh, I'm thinking of Apple Computer. They're working on uh, the Lisa computer was what it was going to be, and this maverick bunch decides, no, we're going to try to implement some of the things that we've learned at Xerox PARC and some other ideas we have, and we're going to call it Macintosh. We're going to be the Macintosh computer. They went to a separate building, I recall, and at some point early on, they had wooed away some of the Lisa developers, I believe, and they're talking about, we've got to have a manifesto. What are we about here? And and one of the things that came out of that was we need a pirate flag. And so they hoist this pirate flag literally over their building to sort of say, we're the rebels. We're the ones that are doing things so differently. It's going to just look crazy. Jobs is famous later on for saying, we're going to put a dent in the universe. It was that kind of thinking. Later on, it becomes think different, right? This incredible commercial campaign that inspired so many. But all of that was, at the origin story is we put up a doggone pirate flag, and that's where the Mac came out of. What back then was called the Macintosh Computer Division. So the origin story of a pirate flag, but why the flag? Is the flag always a good thing? Is being a maverick always a good thing? What are we doing now that's honoring being a maverick and not honoring being a maverick. There are so many conversations that could flow out of that, but an origin story. What are the things like my buy here, pay here lot, like the Mac at Apple, that really explain what we're about because that's where we started.
Hmm. No, that's a fantastic story. And likewise, I'd heard the same story.
Yeah,
Yeah, you took some of the rebels, the best and brightest, you sequestered them, they set themselves apart so that they could do things differently. And there also was a certain amount of autonomy to that,
yeah,
which is one of the hallmarks of high achievement, high engagement, high creativity. People got to be free to do these things.
yep.
To literally their slogan, think differently.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, that's
We could talk about that for a very long time. And it actually goes back to our lowest common denominator podcast that we just had, right? That's a great example of how they had an antidote for that.
Oh, definitely, definitely. One of the neatest examples I ever saw of this was the restaurant chain Tom and Chi. Uh,
Yes.
so, so when you with every beverage you got from Tom and Chi, which was this boutique store that only sold grilled cheese and tomato soups.
Yep.
So you could build your own grilled cheese, 15, 20 different cheeses and breads, and then different kinds of tomato soup. But every cup had the founder's story in a storyboard on the cup.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you got the cup, and it said, we started out. It was a little booth next to a ice skating rink in Cincinnati, and our little concession stand. We sold tomato soup and grilled cheese because that's all we had room for, and people wanted something warm when they're out on the ice. And then we expanded to this building, and then we went here, and then we went on Shark Tank, and right. But every
That's
single
right.
person who ever ordered a beverage could follow the story, the origin story, and how they built this thing, into a franchise model.
That's great. That's great. Well, I mean, every company has one, and I think the core that you're trying to figure out is what are the beliefs we have because of how we started, that shape our values, that shape our behaviors today. And you can think about this on a family level all sorts of times. I had a Depression era grandma. And so, she was very thrifty with her money. She knew what it was like to be hungry. Okay, well, that's part, we're thrifty in this family. Why? Because we know what it's like. That this could be a really, it's more than just, the date and the activity that you did. It was the ordeal you overcame to launch the firm. So, in fact, uh, that's a couple other organizations that I work with. That leads to my second story, stories of the bad times and the lessons learned.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I have worked with car dealerships that have overcome extreme adversity with the factory that they represent in their community. I have to be careful here because I can't spill the beans on some stories that I think, frankly, are very private. But stories that revolve around bigotry against a class of people, stories around, we're going to get rid of you as a dealer because you're a certain kind of person, you don't have a certain level of education, things like that. And I'm speaking in very vague terms, but what happened was, in one instance that I'm thinking of in particular, the organization to this day still sort of feels like we don't need you to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
We will figure out success even if you guys are completely broken at the factory level. There are many stories like this. I've heard about one where to this day, the dealer principal shows up at meetings with the factory and is wearing socks. And if you look at the socks closely, they are little images of the middle finger. That's a culture. That's a culture, right? That's a cultural behavior driven by some experiences from the past. Are they fair? Right? Like, are we giving the factory, an unfair, tar and feathering here? Uh, maybe, right? But that's the point. Let's wrestle with that. Let's talk about some of these bad experiences we've had that have driven some of our behavior and see what's there that's really part of our DNA that's made us successful.
Oh yeah, yeah, and those stories, right, illustrate strengths. And I've got a store. I think it's one of my favorite founding stories. They were awarded the franchise in 1945.
Mm,
So it's a American manufacturer. They get the franchise 1945. So World War II just ended. They have the franchise, right? We're open for business, and Ford, in this case, the manufacturer, did not ship them a car until late 1946. Right? And not because they didn't want to, it's because we were building tanks and airplanes and jeeps,
yep.
and then we had to switch back over to civilian production. So they're
Yep.
just so this business operated for a little over a year without a product.
Wow.
You know? and,
Wow.
and they still talk about to this day, or what was the ability to be comfortable with risk,
Yeah.
right? To take a chance, to have faith in the long term that this will all work out. Just so many wonderful lessons out of the story that, yeah, here we are, 80 plus years later, and it's still here.
Yeah. I mean, and again, right, like that's driving some of our behavior. I mean, that is the point of what we're getting at here is that there's something really true about us that is still driving behavior, except when it's not, right? And we'll talk about that as we wrap up. I do want to give sort of one other. This is maybe the easiest one, but stories of heroes and triumph. I'm thinking of Porsche and its drive to win on the racetrack. And they did it so many times in so many creative ways and created a product that was really unlike anything else out there. Things that they were doing that got implemented into their civilian vehicles. There are countless stories of races that they won in really innovative ways that changed the course of their entire product line and really influenced an industry. Um, Probably some others that we could talk about in the exact same way, but what were the specific ways that Porsche was doing it? Right, it wasn't with the biggest, right? That they were, they weren't muscle cars. They were
Mm-hmm.
doing it with some really creative engineering that is still part of the DNA to this day. So that's one example. There are many others we could talk about. These mountaintop moments, right? How did we get there? What allowed us to be champions? And so many organizations talk about the glory days, right? And I think a lot of times they focus on we were that honored, and what they really need to be thinking about is what did we do that made us that honored? What were the things that we achieved that got us to that level of honor? Instead of telling me about how big this place used to be or how many employees you used to have or how well regarded you were in the community or the market, tell me about what were the things that got you to those laurels, if you will. So yeah, just worth mentioning that I think that's the third one: origin stories, the overcoming adversity stories, and then the triumph stories.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. There's nothing more fun than yeah, the winning. Right. This
Right.
is it's often a David and Goliath story. In this case, yeah, yeah. Like your example, Porsche was this tiny little manufacturer that was taking on all the great racing cars of its time, and doing it in the exact opposite fashion. Everybody else was building big, large, powerful cars, and they built
Right.
tiny, lightweight cars,
Yeah.
which was the exact opposite of what everybody else was doing. So that going back to kind of like your Apple thing, right? Think differently, right? We
Yeah.
we, we carved our own path, our own direction, and we continue to do so.
Yeah. I think that's it. And you kind of predicted where I was going with this at the beginning, talking about that the stories, maybe in some cases aren't true. And so just as a wrap up, I do want to mention that, you may be telling yourself a story that is not actually accurate.
Mhm.
I had somebody tell me recently, the company I work for is just completely different from when I started. It used to be so family oriented, and now it's I'm just a cog in a machine,
Mhm.
right? Well, it is a different company than when you started, and things have changed. The company that this particular person worked for has grown immensely. It's now multiple sites. It continues to grow. There's a whole additional layer of management because they've gotten so big. They needed that many more folks to oversee different sides of the operation. And so really, the story ought to be that we're growing. And no, there will not be the single owner who has his hand on everything going on and knows everybody by name. That can't happen anymore. It's too many people. So we are a new thing, and so there might be a new story that we need to start telling, right? Sometimes it's the story that we told, and we're not operating by those principles anymore in a bad way. Like we're not honoring that. We say we're about family oriented, and we fired the guy who was undergoing cancer treatments. But sometimes it's the flip of that. Sometimes it's, well, the story's changed. The story has changed. It's not that we have changed. It's that there's a new story to be told here, and we need to start mapping out that story and give ourselves some space here to say, yeah, and here's why the culture has shifted in a good way. This is a good thing. So I want to say that out loud.
No, that's a fabulous point. And thinking about this from the ultimate practical standpoint, looking at the idea of we've done this in stores, so when we're trying to figure out what do we got here, what do we have to work with. Sometimes if they have values espoused, or the owners told us or the chief day-to-day person has told us the values they aspire to, then you can ask people. So all right, so I've heard this is a value. Give me a story of your team living this value.
Yes.
Yeah, we value honesty. We made a mistake with a customer, and it was months later when we discovered that we'd overcharged the customer, and the customer was completely happy and nobody knew, and yet we called the customer, told them we made a mistake, and then sent them a check.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. That illustrates this value of honesty, of
We
integrity.
lived out that value.
Yeah, this is us living it out. Right, and then you also want to ask, right, when you're looking for the gaps, give me a story of us not living up to one of our
Yep.
espoused values.
Yep.
And then yeah, you hear those stories. Well, this we didn't do the right thing as we define it for this person, this team member, this manager, this type of person. Here's the story.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they tell you the story. So yeah, you start to mine for those stories and then figure out, okay, are there things that we need to continue to do that are positive and wonderful, and are there changes that need to happen in order for us not to erode the culture that we state that we want to have?
Yeah, thank you for saying erode, because I think that's the issue, right? Sometimes you get a little life lesson in those moments. We didn't honor the value that we really think we're about and has been a part of us from the beginning of our story, and we paid the consequences. And sometimes, yeah, it's back to the pay now, pay later thing, right? We didn't pay the consequences, but everybody here now has one proof point that we don't actually mean what we say.
Yep.
And we start to over time erode. So it's important to know the stories so that you can identify what's the essence there that we've got to continue to live by. And I just I think the stories. Our friend John Kusava likes to say, stories are storage, right? That it's the cultural memory of our organization, our family, whatever group we're talking about. And if that's the case, then this is your chance, right? This is your easiest chance to really make something stick. All your statistics, all your acronyms, they're all great. Tell me a story. I'll remember the story. So powerful stuff here. Powerful, powerful stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So think about, yeah, the stories you tell, the stories your people tell, and are they the stories that illustrate who you are, and are you proud, or would you like to see changes?
That's it. That's exactly it.
Yeah. Good stuff. Now everybody's going to be listening for stories.
I hope so. And please send them our way. We love a good story about a company. We love them.
Oh yes. Yes. Always excited to read those. The, speaking of great tellers of tales,
Mm-hmm.
yes, our announcer, and somebody told me once that he even does, he narrates books. So he's quite the storyteller. Please take it away, our announcer, Mr. Wolf.
And that's it. Join us next time when you'll hear Mike say, well, I'm sure he'll say something pithy. Don't miss it. Next time, It Doesn't Take a Genius.
That's good.